Soraya Langford had spent years believing in the perfect life she had built with Keegan Mercer, but in a single night, that illusion shattered. Keegan, the billionaire businessman admired by the world, was nothing more than a liar cloaked in power. As she stood outside the candlelit restaurant, watching him whisper intimately to his mistress, Soraya felt a cold realization settle in. Her husband had betrayed her, and he thought she would never find out. But Keegan had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated the woman he married. Soraya Whitmore had spent years believing in the perfect life she had built with Keegan Langford. Their love story had been the kind people envied: an extravagant wedding, a sprawling estate, and a marriage wrapped in luxury. From the outside, everything about them seemed flawless. Soraya was the elegant, poised wife of a billionaire investor, and Keegan was the powerful man who had it all. They attended galas, traveled the world, and appeared in glossy magazine spreads showcasing their opulent lifestyle. When Soraya found out she was pregnant, she believed their love had reached its highest point. A child would complete their fairy tale, giving them something money couldn't buy. But perfection, she was starting to realize, had its cracks. Over the past few months, something had shifted. Keegan had always been busy, but lately, his absences stretched longer. He claimed to be drowning in work, flying across the world to close deals and secure investments, but Soraya couldn't ignore the unease that gnawed at her. His schedule was unpredictable. His phone was constantly out of reach, and his once affectionate attention had turned into distracted nods and hurried goodbyes. She had tried to rationalize it, telling herself that high-powered businessmen had demanding lives. He provided for her, adored her, and never failed to shower her with expensive gifts. But deep down, something wasn't right. It was the little things that haunted her. The scent of a perfume that wasn't hers clinging to his shirts, the hushed phone calls that ended the moment she walked into the room, the way he avoided her touch just slightly. Soraya convinced herself that she was imagining things, that pregnancy hormones were making her paranoid. She had no proof, no real reason to accuse him, but doubt had a way of growing, feeding on the silences, the inconsistencies, the unanswered questions. Then, one evening, as she sat alone in their dimly lit bedroom, her phone buzzed with an anonymous message. The words sent a chill through her body. "Your husband isn't where he says he is." Attached was a location pin for a high-end restaurant in the city. Her hands shook as she read the message over and over again. Keegan had told her he was in London for a crucial business meeting. Yet, here he was, just miles away. Soraya's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing with possibilities. Was this a mistake? A cruel joke? Who had sent it? But the fear creeping into her veins told her the answer before she could even ask the question. Someone wanted her to know. Someone had seen something. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. There was no turning back now. She needed to know the truth. With determination setting in, she called for a driver and ordered him to take her to the restaurant. The entire ride felt like an eternity, her thoughts spiraling into places she wasn't ready to face. Maybe she would find nothing. Maybe she was walking into a misunderstanding. But in her heart, she already knew. As the car pulled up in front of the restaurant, Soraya hesitated. A part of her didn't want to step out, didn't want to confirm what she already feared. But she forced herself forward, gripping her coat tightly as she walked inside. The restaurant was warm, filled with the hum of quiet conversations and the soft notes of a pianist playing in the background. Everything about the atmosphere was intimate, romantic. Her stomach churned. Her eyes scanned the room, searching, hoping, until she saw him. Keegan sat at a secluded table in the corner, his posture relaxed, his smile easy. He looked nothing like the overworked businessman he claimed to be. Across from him sat a woman, Stunning, blonde, dressed in a red dress that hugged her body perfectly. Her manicured fingers reached across the table, lightly tracing Keegan's hand. Soraya's breath hitched as she took in the sight before her. He wasn't just having dinner. He wasn't discussing business. This wasn't a colleague or a friend. The way he looked at her, the way their bodies leaned toward each other, was unmistakable. It was the look of a man completely enthralled by someone who wasn't his wife. Soraya stood frozen at the entrance of the restaurant, her breath caught in her throat. The world around her seemed to slow, muffled voices and clinking glasses fading into the background. Her eyes remained locked on Keegan, taking in every detail of his betrayal. The way he smiled, the way his fingers rested against the woman's hand, the intimate lean of their bodies toward each other. It was clear that this wasn't their first time together. The connection between them was effortless, natural, like two people who had long since crossed the line from secrecy to familiarity. A storm of emotions crashed inside her: anger, humiliation, heartbreak. She had spent years by his side, building a life with him, believing in the promises he had made. And now, with her pregnancy well into its final months, he had stripped away every illusion she had clung to. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was about the way he had looked her in the eyes so many times and lied. The extravagant gifts, the occasional flowers, the reassurances that she was the only woman in his world. None of it had been real. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, angling the camera just right to capture them together. She needed proof, not just for herself, but for the storm that would follow. The flash didn't go off, but she barely breathed as she took photo after photo, each image searing into her memory. She zoomed in, catching every detail: the unmistakable features of Keegan, the expensive watch on his wrist, the subtle way his hand cupped the woman's fingers as if she belonged to him. Then, as if sensing a shift in the air, the woman turned, slightly, and Soraya's stomach dropped. The face looking back at Keegan belonged to Isla Moreau, the daughter of his business partner, a woman whose family held deep financial ties to Keegan's empire. Soraya had seen her at events, exchanged pleasantries with her, even sat across from her at dinners where Keegan had pretended to be the devoted husband. She was young, ambitious, and beautiful, and now she was the woman Keegan had chosen over his pregnant wife. The betrayal burned even deeper. This wasn't some fleeting infidelity. This was calculated. Keegan wasn't just cheating, he was positioning himself for something bigger. If he planned to leave, if he planned to replace her, he had already chosen the perfect candidate: a woman with wealth, influence, and a family that could strengthen his business. It was never just about passion or desire. It was about strategy, power, and control. Soraya felt a tightness in her chest, her breathing shallow. The urge to confront him, to march over and demand answers, raged inside her. She wanted to scream, to throw his drink in his face, to expose him in front of everyone. But she didn't move. She forced herself to swallow the lump in her throat, to push down the emotions threatening to consume her. A public confrontation would give him the upper hand. He would find a way to twist the narrative, to paint her as the emotional, unstable wife who couldn't handle the pressures of his world. Instead, she turned on her heels and walked out of the restaurant, her mind already racing with the next steps. She wouldn't let him destroy her. She wouldn't allow him to rewrite their story while she faded into the background. If Keegan thought he could betray her and walk away unscathed, he had severely underestimated her. As she slid into the back seat of the waiting car, she clenched, her fists, her nails digging into her palms. The pain grounded her, reminding her that she wasn't powerless. Keegan Langford had made the mistake of underestimating the woman he had vowed to love, and that mistake was about to cost him everything. Soraya sat in the back seat of the car, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past her. The weight of betrayal pressed against her chest, But beneath the pain, something else began to surface, an unshakable determination. Keegan had played her for a fool, carefully crafting the illusion of a devoted husband while secretly planning his escape. But if he thought she would fade into the background, broken and discarded, he was wrong. She wasn't just a pregnant wife left behind. She was a woman who had spent years learning the ways of the powerful, and now she would use everything she knew against him. Her fingers tightened around her phone as she scrolled through the pictures she had taken. Each image felt like a knife to the heart, but she forced herself to look. She needed to remember this moment, to let the anger settle into something useful. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was public humiliation. Keegan had paraded around with his mistress in their own city, believing himself untouchable. He had grown careless, convinced that Soraya would never suspect him, let alone catch him in the act. The car pulled into their estate, and as Soraya stepped out, a strange sense of calm washed over her. She wasn't going to fall apart. She wasn't going to beg for explanations or cry into the night. Instead, she was going to take back control of her life, starting now. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. The grand chandelier above cast golden light across the marble floors, the air thick with the scent of expensive candles. Everything looked the same as it always had, luxurious, pristine, untouched by the chaos unfolding in her marriage. But Soraya knew better. This house wasn't a home. It was a gilded cage, and Keegan had kept her locked inside it, feeding her beautiful lies while planning his future with someone else. She made her way to his study, a place she rarely entered. Keegan had always been territorial about his work, keeping his business dealings under tight control. But tonight she no longer cared about boundaries. If he was hiding something, she would find it. She sat at his desk and powered on his computer, her heart racing as she navigated through his files. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Financial statements, business contracts, routine emails. But then she found something that made her pulse quicken. Hidden among the files was a document labeled Agreement Isla Moreau. Wab clicked it open, her breath catching as she read through its contents. It wasn't just an affair. It was a deal. Keegan had been negotiating something far more sinister, an arranged settlement between himself and Isla's family. If he married Isla, her father would grant him exclusive rights to $1 billion investment deal overseas. The affair wasn't just personal, it was transactional. Keegan wasn't just betraying her, he was preparing to erase her entirely. Soraya's hands shook as she scrolled further. A section outlined the timeline. Divorce proceedings would begin within the next 2 months, discreetly handled to avoid media attention. Keegan would retain full control of their shared assets, while she would receive a modest settlement. And the most gut-wrenching detail of all, custody of their unborn child, was mentioned in vague terms, leaving it open for negotiation. Rage burned through her veins. Keegan had already planned her downfall, mapping out a future that didn't include her. He had no intention of fighting for their marriage, no guilt over what he had done. He had simply decided that she was replaceable, a stepping stone towards something greater. She shut the computer with a snap, her mind racing. She wouldn't allow this. She wouldn't let him discard her like an inconvenient business deal. He had underestimated her resilience, her intelligence, and most importantly, her ability to strike back. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders. If Keegan wanted a battle, he was about to get one, and by the time she was done, he would regret ever thinking he could betray her and walk away unscathed. Soraya barely slept that night. Her mind was consumed with every detail she had uncovered, each piece fitting together into a picture more devastating than she had imagined. Keegan had played her with precision, carefully orchestrating his next move while ensuring she remained oblivious. But he had underestimated her. He had thought she was nothing more than a devoted wife, too blinded by love to see the truth. Now, she was wide awake, and she wasn't going to sit back and let him destroy her life. By morning, she had already formulated her plan. She had spent years by Keegan's side, attending the same elite events, listening to his conversations, watching how the powerful manipulated those beneath them. He had always believed she was nothing more than an accessory to his success, but in reality, she had been learning, absorbing everything. And now, she would use that knowledge to dismantle him piece by piece. She started with the lawyers. Keegan had been careful, but not careful enough. He had assumed she would go through the motions of a divorce without putting up a fight. But before he could even serve her papers, she made the first move. She contacted the most ruthless divorce attorney in the city, a woman known for making men like Keegan beg for mercy. Soraya provided every detail, from his affair to his secret business deal, ensuring that when the time came, she would be the one with the upper hand. Next, she reached out to the media. Keegan valued his image above all else. His reputation was what kept investors pouring money into his ventures. If word got out that he had been using his marriage as a stepping stone to a billion-dollar deal, the fallout would be catastrophic. Soraya didn't need to expose everything at once. A well-placed leak, a whisper in the right ears, and soon enough, journalists would start digging on their own. Then she focused on his finances. She had never meddled in his business before, but she knew enough to understand where it would hurt him most. Keegan had made the mistake of thinking she was content to live off his wealth without question, but she had always kept track of what was hers. She moved quickly, shifting assets before he could lock her out. By the time he realized what she was doing, it would be too late. Still, none of this was enough. Keegan had planned to take everything from her, including their unborn child. That was the one thing she would never allow. She knew how men like him operated. If he wanted control over their baby, it wasn't out of love or fatherly devotion. It was about power. A child would tie him to Isla's family, giving him leverage in their agreement. He didn't care about being a father. He cared about what their baby represented in his world of wealth and influence. Soraya refused to let him win. She met with her doctor that afternoon, gathering every document that proved her pregnancy had been difficult, that she needed stability and care. The evidence would show that Keegan had neglected her, that he had left her vulnerable while parading around with his mistress. If a custody battle arose, she would be ready. By evening, everything was in motion. Keegan had no idea that his world was about to crumble beneath him. He had built his empire on deception, but Soraya had spent the past 24 hours ensuring that when he fell, there would be no safety net. She sat in the dimly lit living room, waiting for him to return. She had considered leaving before he got home, making her moves in silence. But no, he needed to see the moment his carefully constructed life began to collapse. He needed to know that it was her who had done it. As the sound of his car pulling into the driveway echoed through the house, Soraya felt a slow, satisfied calm settle over her. Keegan had made the first move, but she was the one who would end the game. Keegan entered the house, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. Soraya remained seated, her hands resting on her stomach, steady and composed. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. He had no idea that the foundation of his world had already begun to crumble beneath him. He moved through the house with the same arrogance he always carried, believing himself untouchable. But tonight, everything was different. The first sign of trouble came when he checked his phone. A barrage of missed calls and messages from his legal team, his financial advisors, and even a few business associates. Confusion flickered across his face, but he pushed it aside, unaware of the full scope of what had been set in motion. His empire had been carefully built, every move calculated. But now, the cracks were beginning to show. Upstairs in his office, he found his laptop open, documents neatly displayed on the screen. The agreement with Isla's family, the leaked financial statements, the legal notice from Soraya's lawyer, evidence that his wife had not only discovered his betrayal, but had used it to strike first. His hands clenched into fists as he realized the extent of her retaliation. She had left nothing untouched. His assets were being frozen, his reputation was under threat, and his divorce was now a battle he was unprepared to fight. Meanwhile, Soraya remained downstairs, waiting. She knew what was coming. Keegan had never been a man who handled losing well. He thrived on control, on being the one to dictate the terms of his life. But for the first time, he was powerless. Every plan he had made, every step he had taken to erase her from his life, had been dismantled in a matter of hours. His voice rang through the house, filled with rage and disbelief. He called her name, demanding an explanation, demanding to know how she had managed to get ahead of him. But she didn't move. She didn't respond. She had no interest in hearing his excuses, his anger, or his attempts to regain control. He stormed down the stairs. Soraya simply stood, her expression unreadable. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She wasn't the fragile woman he had expected to walk away quietly. She had taken everything he had thrown at her and turned it into a weapon against him. Keegan's phone rang again, and this time he answered. The voice on the other end was frantic. One of his business partners, warning him that the media had gotten hold of the scandal. The whispers had turned into headlines, and now investors were pulling out. The deal with Isla's family was falling apart. The very future he had risked everything for was slipping through his fingers. He turned to Soraya, realization dawning in his eyes. She had orchestrated all of this. She had played the game better than he had, and now there was nothing he could do to undo it. She finally spoke, her voice steady and firm. She told him that she was leaving, but not before ensuring that he would never regain control of her life. The divorce would go public, the truth would be known, and when their child was born, he would have no claim over them. Keegan had spent years believing he was the one in power, the one who controlled the narrative. But in the end, he had underestimated the one person who had been watching him the closest. As Soraya walked out the door, she felt no sadness, no regret. The weight of betrayal had been lifted, replaced by something far more powerful, freedom. Keegan's downfall was now inevitable, and she had no intention of looking back.